Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon and welcome to the NTU Decarbonisation Forum. I'm Karen.
And I'm Vinit.
And we'll be your MCs for today. Today's event is near the end of what has been an amazing collaborative process over the past 3 months. We gathered a diverse set of stakeholders to discuss how to accelerate the pace of decarbonization in ASEAN for two important industries, buildings and textiles and apparel. We split into working groups that met 5 times to identify known solutions that help reduce emissions, to discuss the obstacles that prevent companies from doing more, and finally, to generate recommendations for how stakeholders can help overcome these obstacles.
When we say nearly the end of the process, it's because next month we'll be publishing a full account of the working group's findings in the form of playbooks. So do keep a lookout for that. One for each of these industries. Today, we are excited to share with you some of the most impactful ideas from these playbooks. And here's the agenda for the remainder of this afternoon.
After the welcome and opening remarks, we will move to our keynote address by Prof. Adam Switzer. The first panel discussion on buildings follows the keynote speech, after which we will have a short tea break. Following the tea break, we have our remaining 2 panels, one on our second industry, textile and apparel, and a final panel discussing financial innovations that could help mobilize the considerable capital required to address carbon emissions in ASEAN. Finally, the event concludes with closing remarks from the Dean of the Business School. Now that you know where we're going, it's our pleasure to introduce Prof. Simba Chang, Director of the Center for Sustainable Finance Innovation.
Prof. Simba, please.
Very good afternoon to everyone. My job is to thank everybody before we start everything. So I need this piece of paper to make sure that no one is left out. So we first thank you all for joining us at this inaugural NTU Decarbonisation Forum. So my name is Sim Chang. I also have a nickname, Simba, which I took from the movie The Lion King. At Nanyang Business School, I'm a professor of finance, also the associate dean for research, and also the director of the Center for Sustainable Finance Innovation, or CSFI for short. Today we will talk about decarbonization, which is imperative for combating climate change and securing a viable future for humanity. So given its importance, I really want to thank maybe around more than 50 industry leaders joining the working group discussions in the past few months, making great contributions to our decarbonization initiative. I also want to thank our generous sponsors. I don't know whether you can see them here. Maybe not. There were partners, Earth Observatory Singapore and London Stock Exchange Group. We are truly grateful for their partnership, sponsorship, and strong belief in our vision as well. A special thank you goes to my fellow center co-directors, Professor Matthew Durst and Professor Cindy Deng, sitting somewhere, okay, for actually their vision in initiating this forum and for their outstanding dedications and commitment to decarbonization and sustainable finance in general. I also want to extend my sincere gratitude to the whole organizing committee led by Matt, along with all the team members who work tirelessly behind the scenes. So without their, again, dedication and hard work, this forum can never become a reality. So without further ado, I'm very happy to invite NTU's Vice President for Lifelong Learning Alumni Engagement, Professor Bo Wai Fong, to give an opening address. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simba. It's my great pleasure to be here. A very warm welcome and good afternoon to our industry partners, colleagues and students. Welcome to the inaugural NTU Decarbonisation Forum. So this forum is actually organized by Nanyang Business School and the Center for Sustainable Finance Innovation. Very glad to see the center being so active and bring in such good industry leaders for this decarbonization forum. So in today's forum, we're discussing a very timely topic that has very far-reaching effects. The topic is on decarbonization, which, as we all know, is a process for reducing carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions, which is very central in our battle against climate change. As we all know, this battle is not really just at the environmental level, but we all need to put in and play our parts at a collective level because reducing the carbon footprint really requires very comprehensive change across multiple sectors. This will include transforming how we produce, how we consume our energy, as well as how we build infrastructure and how we innovate in technology. And we're very glad to see a very diverse group of stakeholders here, including the industry leaders, investors, and regulators. Your support is really very crucial to making changes happen. And your perspectives will be very valuable today to enrich our discussions. And we expect you will be providing a lot of meaningful insights into what decarbonization actually looks like in practice. So this forum will be focusing on two key industries as mentioned by the MCs. First is in the buildings industry. This sector is really a cornerstone of development across ASEAN, and Singapore is very proud to be at the forefront of innovation in this field. So we have numerous local firms as well as organizations that are actually leading the way in lower carbon solutions. We expect our forum participants today will be exploring sustainable design, materials, engineering, construction, as well as facilities management in the building sector. Another very interesting sector I think we'll be talking about today is the textiles and apparel. This is a less homogeneous and less standardized sector. But we also have a lot of companies that are headquartered in Singapore, but their emissions actually come from production that are scattered across multiple countries, particularly those with more cost-competitive labor. Forum discussions today, we expect, will be covering how to enhance sustainability in garment manufacturing as well as fabric mills. So throughout the day, you will have a chance to learn about the practical playbooks that were being developed by our industry working groups specifically for this forum. And I know they've really put in a lot of hard work and effort in this. These playbooks are designed to provide actionable steps. These include the operational enhancements, the innovative financing mechanisms, as well as the regulatory support that can enable the ASEAN firms to actually reduce emissions. They reflect the hours of dedicated dialogue and collaboration that essentially highlights the very critical support that we will actually need from various stakeholders to very effectively implement the change and reduce emissions. So our commitment to decarbonization really marks a major shift in how we think about economic growth as well as caring for the environment. So as leaders in technology, business, and education, NTU as well as NBS hopes to combine the strengths of our various disciplines to drive innovative, practical, and climate-conscious solutions. That's why you see today is the collaborative effort of multiple parties in NTU, including Business School, including representatives from Earth Observatory, as well as CSFI. So CSFI, in particular, exemplifies this approach in financial innovation and sustainable finance. Ultimately, we believe that doing well means doing good, right? Which is why we are getting the word out, making connections, and also hopefully creating a community around this goal. So in closing, we really hope that the NTU Decarbonisation Forum will be the launch of a new platform for ideas, strategies, and collaborations in our journey towards decarbonization and also to see sustainability practices adopted across all sectors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Paul. Today, we share a common goal to engage with a diverse group of stakeholders, including industry leaders, investors, and regulators, to learn how to accelerate the pace of decarbonization in key industries throughout the region. Why is this so important? To tell us more about the science and how critical it is that we set up the pace of our efforts, let's welcome Prof. Adam Douglas-Switzer from NTU's Asian School of the Environment to share a keynote speech with us. Prof. Switzer, please.
There's a clicker. I believe I need that. Okay, I'm going to stand a little bit back. Some of you probably realized I was wearing a mask 1 minute ago. Now I'm not wearing a mask, so I'm going to stand back a little bit and speak a little louder, so hopefully you can hear me. I'm really not feeling very well, so I'm sorry if I'm a little bit under par today. Firstly, a big thank you to our sponsors, the Earth Observatory of Singapore. I was one of the founding members of the Earth Observatory of Singapore. I moved here 15 years ago when it started. And it's a great pleasure to come down to this end of the campus and to talk to you today a little bit about climate change, but also talk about decarbonization. And I'm going to start with the absolute basics. I'm going to do a little bit of science along the way because I am from the College of Science. And then we'll touch a little bit on the industries. And so a big thank you to the Earth Observatory of Singapore and the London Stock Exchange Group for their support of the event. It's great to be here. As you can see, I have a variety of roles in the university. I like to keep busy. I'm trying to drop a few of these, so hopefully that list will go away soon. Decarbonization. If you take it at its root term, right? We're talking about carbon, okay? And when you think about decarbonization, you go and look it up, you get definitions like to reduce the levels of carbon emissions, such as carbon dioxide caused by involvement in something such as facility, process, or organization. It's a very basic definition, but it's not really decarbonization. There's a lot more to carbon than just what we want to remove from our atmosphere and from our processes. And so I actually don't like the term decarbonization. It shouldn't have anything against carbon. You're made of carbon. Most of the things in this room are made of carbon in some way. We shouldn't get rid of all carbon. What we're talking about is a fundamental issue, a particular carbon dioxide group of molecules and gases that we want to remove from the atmosphere. That's what we're talking about when we talk about decarbonization. And I'm smiling at Matthew down here because I remember the email that I got when I was asked to come and give this speech was for me to go hard and really hammer home the message of the importance of climate change. So I'm going to do that before I pass out. So what is it about this carbon? Why do we need to get rid of it? Well, we need to understand the Earth's carbon cycle. It's a very complicated system. It has a huge natural variability. It involves removing carbon from many parts of our Earth, from our deep Earth, from the ecosystems, from our plants, from our organisms, into the atmosphere, through the oceans. It's a very complicated web of transport of carbon throughout the Earth system, but it's a balanced budget. Well, it was a reasonably well-balanced budget. But what we've done is we've started human emissions, and you can see the numbers there. The yellows are natural fluxes, the reds are human contributions, and the white is our stored carbon. We have the ability to store carbon, we have the ability to remove carbon, we have the ability to create carbon. What we're creating is a score of about 9 out of this total. And you can see it's not a huge amount of carbon that we're creating if you think about the whole carbon cycle, but it's a very important part. And so one of the things I'm going to address in just a moment is exactly why carbon in our atmosphere is important. Because often I'll give a talk like this, a fairly generalist talk, and after the talk, someone will come up to me and say, exactly how does carbon dioxide warm our atmosphere? So please indulge me for a moment, because in a moment we're going to have a little bit of a chemistry lesson, followed by a short physics lesson to really pay homage to my home college of College of Science, because I think it's an important thing to consider. But to understand this carbon cycle, we have to understand the fluxes and how they change through time. And they're spatially and chronologically disparate in terms of we have long-term processes like the burial of carbon in natural systems that take hundreds of thousands of years at times, up to millions of years. And we have very short-term processes like the interaction between the ocean and the atmosphere and the sequestering of carbon dioxide into our oceans. And so we have to understand the dynamics of this very complicated system. And that's why understanding climate is quite a complicated topic at the best of times. But if we think about the carbon budget 2023, I want you to focus on the orange bit, right? Atmospheric CO2 growth rate. We continue through fossil fuel use, through land use change, and through changes in the way that we use our environments to produce huge amounts of carbon. So total emissions at 40 plus, okay? And we're talking, and then atmospheric growth rate of 16.9. We are still continuing to produce more and more carbon dioxide and more carbon that is going into our atmosphere. And we have to stop. And that's the key to decarbonization. Now, the next thing is understanding what exactly is happening in our atmosphere. Our atmosphere is amazing. It's a very thin envelope of gases. And it's something we've been studying for hundreds and hundreds of years. There's no newness to this science of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. I put a few key points in here. I want you to look at the dates, okay? Discovering that gases can trap heat, 1856, okay? Testing the heat trapping ability of gases by John Tyndall, found nitrogen and oxygen have no ability to trap heat. Everyone went, oh, okay. But carbon dioxide, ozone, and water vapor, key elements of our atmosphere, have the ability to trap heat. 1859, we worked this out. Well, we didn't. Tyndall did. Importantly, and somewhat ironically, Tyndall was concerned that if the amount of these gases dropped in the atmosphere, the Earth would start to cool. Now, our view is very different. And then in 1896, a Swedish chemist, Arrhenius, connected coal, carbon dioxide, and climate. In 1896, this is not new science. There's nothing new about the science of climate change. There's nothing new about our understanding of heating the atmosphere, but we continue to do it. So this is where I'm starting to go hard. Is that okay, Matthew? We haven't been listening since the 1800s. We've started to listen recently in the last couple of years. And it's a real testament to much of the dedication of climate scientists since the 1800s that they're still out there trying to get people to listen. Because weaker people would have probably given up by now. The next question I'm asked, exactly how does it work? Okay, so remember the early foundations were that some of the gases in the atmosphere, including nitrogen, which makes up most of our atmosphere, don't heat, don't collect radiation, don't heat. How does carbon dioxide do it? Because the carbon dioxide molecule, 1 carbon, 2 oxygens, okay? It has the ability to vibrate. And when it does, it collects that heat, okay? So for N2 and O2, the heat goes straight past, the radiated heat goes straight past. But for CO2 molecules, it absorbs infrared radiation and it starts to vibrate. And that causes heat. And it causes the heat atmosphere around it to heat up. So every molecule of CO2 that gets hit by infrared radiation starts to heat up. So the more CO2 we put in the atmosphere, the more we start to heat the atmosphere. Now, when we said that nitrogen and oxygen don't really heat up, that wasn't really true. That was the understanding in the 1800s. But now we're going to move from chemistry, because after we've heated these CO2 molecules, we've excited the CO2 molecules, those CO2 molecules absorb photons, they get in an energized state, and that energized state starts to energize the cold N2 and O2 molecules. And so we have a physical knock-on effect. So now cold layers are now warmer in our atmosphere as well. And so when we think about it, we've got both chemistry and physics happening. Our carbon dioxide is absorbing that infrared radiation, starting to absorb that heat, getting excited, and releasing that energy in terms of heat that then heats the other molecules around it in the atmosphere. What does that mean at the end of the day? It means that we are rapidly increasing the heat of our atmosphere throughout the whole profile of the atmosphere. And much of this is occurring in the lower atmosphere. Now, the next thing is cause and effect, okay? I know why I'm feeling sick today. There's a cause and effect. My kids went back to school last week, collected some diseases, brought them home, and made me and my wife sick. There's very clear cause and effect. Carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, we add carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we heat the atmosphere. How do we know that the atmosphere is heating? Because we measure it. We've been measuring temperatures for hundreds and hundreds of years. So this diagram here, we're talking about a baseline, and I like this diagram here from our friends at Columbia because it shows you very clearly just how much we've heated the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution. And the baseline here is 1880 to 1920. There's a common diagram that's shown around the world that starts in the 1950s. We need our baseline back in 1880 to 1920 because this is before the start of the Industrial Revolution. And there's a very clear correlation with our warming atmosphere. And we've warmed the atmosphere already compared to around 1900. In just over 100 years, we've warmed the atmosphere more than 1.2 degrees. We're getting very close to 1.5 degrees. And those of you that are familiar with the Paris Agreement would be to try and limit to 1.5 degrees. We're rapidly heading off there. And the scariest part of that, this very recent plot, this is, I think, till August 9th, is look at the trajectory at the top right-hand side of the plot. This year is likely to be warmer than last year, and last year was the warmest on record. So we're still going in this direction. And if we look at the projections, I know people down in the business school love a good projection. So here we are. If we look at the projections, no matter how we plot this, our projection is for increased temperatures. So what does that mean? I'll come to that in just a minute. But no matter how we look at this, if we don't do something about this, we're going to be looking at least 1.5 degrees of warming relative to 1900s. And so we do have to move forward. It's case closed on this. There should not be a climate debate anymore. We've been measuring CO2 in the atmosphere. It's correlated with temperature. We've known that since the late 1800s. Any scientist that tells you that climate change is not real is a fraud. Is that hard enough, mate? Any scientist who claims CO2 doesn't warm the atmosphere is wrong. We've known that for years. What we need to work on now is reducing our carbon dioxide emissions. We need to work on the other greenhouse gases as well, but we have to work on decarbonizing. And so that's why we're here today. And I like this image from Nomura. I don't know if anyone from Nomura is here, but I like this image from Nomura, so I lifted it with credit. The description of this challenge here, the largest peacetime transformation of the world economy. For anyone in business, you can't be left behind in the decarbonization program. It's fundamental to the future of every sector. And we'll talk a little bit about the sectors. The steel industry, the cement industry, the chemical industry, these ones have made pretty big steps already, and I'll cover a few of them already in a couple of minutes. But one of the things I always try to do when I teach climate change at the other end of campus to our undergraduate students in their first year is deliver a message that doesn't scare them, that gives them hope. And there is real hope here because the technological process, the policy incentives that have come in the last decade, the huge movement towards decarbonization is evidence that there is real hope to this. And there's opportunities for business. And those of you that have been in my class, I think there's a couple of you here, will know that I quote somebody, but I don't say who it is. But it's a very prominent person in business in Singapore that said to me just over 12 years ago, Adam, rest assured that Singapore government and Singapore business sector will move very quickly on climate change as soon as we work out how to make money out of it. You can probably work out who that would have said that. It's true. The reason that people like me come out of our College of Science down to a business school to talk to you about decarbonization and talk to you about climate change is because there is real opportunity. There's opportunity to make money from climate change. And there's opportunity to make money from decarbonization. And there's opportunity to make money from teaching other people how to do it better. And so this is a key diagram. I like this diagram because it does touch on all of those things that we need: technology, policy, and investment. And as the money flows in, things will start changing much more rapidly. Another thing we need to discuss is the idea of carbon neutral and net zero. You cannot open a news article page, not just an individual one, any news agency, and not find an article about net zero or carbon neutrality. And they're often used interchangeably, and they shouldn't. So Matt, I'm going to go hard again. If you're in the industry, please don't do this. Okay, they are two different things. Carbon neutrality, okay, the carbon neutral entity, CO2 emissions are accounted for and coupled with attempts to reduce those emissions, okay, by compensating or reducing emissions elsewhere, okay? That is carbon neutral. Net zero, on the other hand, means that our company reduces the absolute emissions across its whole supply chain, okay? The big difference. So one thing I'm asking you as industry people to do, think about which one you're focusing on. Carbon neutrality or net zero? Because there's a lot of businesses out there saying, we want to be net zero by 2050. Read those definitions. They're very different. If you want to be net zero by 2050, you really better put your foot down. If you want to be carbon neutral, you just need to put your thinking cap on. So they require different efforts. If we think about our emissions, a good financial crisis helps a little. I'm not saying we need another recession, but a good financial crisis helps the emissions numbers. A pandemic definitely helps the emission numbers, but in the very short term. Again, we are still on this huge trajectory towards increasing emissions. But I read a report recently that China may have peaked its emissions. Other countries are clearly on the way down. I find it really interesting. If you want some homework, go home and look at the latest US emissions data. The US emissions data is on a significant steep decline, which is interesting given what's going on in the election cycle. For the US to commit to 10% reduction in emissions by 2030 is nothing because they're already halfway there. And so we need to work globally to address these issues. Now let me think about ASEAN. Let me zoom in a little bit. Matt asked me to zoom in a little bit on ASEAN. The impacts in ASEAN include things like rising sea levels. And that rising sea level may be melting ice sheets and warming our atmosphere, but much of our land in Southeast Asia, particularly in the developing countries of Southeast Asia, is sinking, our coastal land, which has a high concentration of our economic efforts because it's close to ports and close to transport. And so sea level rise is a particular issue. In Singapore, the former Prime Minister stated that we're going to spend up to $100 billion defending Singapore against sea level rise. $100 billion just for this little island. Imagine the cost of defending against sea level rise in places with much longer and more diverse coasts. Increases in the frequency of extreme weather rainfall events, flood events. Some of you may remember the Thai floods of 2011 had huge disruptions to supply chains globally. How often are we going to get these floods and our rainfall patterns, are they going to change? And to do this, we need underlying data. And one of the things that the Earth Observatory of Singapore started to do immediately when we started was to push for the collection of more data, because it's the data that drives the models. If you look at climate model outputs for rainfall for Western Borneo, which is where the new Indonesian capital are, by 2100, it's going to be 20% drier or 20% wetter, because there's no underlying data. So we have to invest in data, and we have to invest in better projections. We don't really know what the future of rainfall is. We at the Earth Observatory of Singapore, we're leading a program called the Climate Transformation Program. One of the focus areas of that is to try and understand the future of extreme hazards and also feed into business models with our partners here in the business school. And Prof. Simba is one of our PIs. Changes to agricultural productivity. What are you going to do if you can't get rice from southern Vietnam anymore because it's all flooded by seawater? How's it going to affect agriculture? And water scarcity. We're already seeing this. We're seeing this in Taiwan right now. In Taiwan right now, they're taking water away from the agricultural industry to feed the semiconductor plants. So what's going to happen if water becomes more scarce? If we think about Singapore, the last big drought in Singapore was in the 1770s. Again, we have very little data. And so we talk about water scarcity, we talk about biodiversity loss, and then we have a big program in the climate transformation program on climate impacts on health. What's going to happen in terms of health? People with outdoor workers with extreme heat. The Singapore V3 model already says that Singapore is going to experience 15 to 20% more extreme hot days by 2075. What does that mean? If you have outdoor workers in your industry, then they're going to be put under extreme heat stress. It may come to the part where you have to stop work during the middle of the day, affecting business productivity. So health impacts, including vector-borne diseases as well. Got really angry a couple of weeks ago because someone from the business sector challenged me because I said, you know, carbon taxation is really, really important because carbon taxation is a way of putting a price on carbon so everybody reacts. It affects the bottom line of businesses and people have to pay attention to it. I said, well, we're just going to move our manufacturing to somewhere where there's no carbon tax. Good luck with that. So this is a map of places that have carbon tax implemented or emissions trading systems implemented or both implemented or thinking about it or developing it. See, Indonesia's there now. Vietnam is there now. Those that want to avoid carbon tax or emission trading have got very few places to run. It's going to cost you money. Any business needs to think about this. What is the cost of carbon in their business? Because at the moment, say, take the Singapore example, our carbon tax only hits certain sectors and certain big polluters, but it's slowly starting to filter down. Eventually, it will hit every sector, and the price is only going up. There's not going to be any way. Carbon is going to cost you money. So you have to drag yourself along with this. I remember I gave a talk in Hong Kong many, many years ago where I said exactly the same thing. Carbon's going to cost you money. This is 17 years ago. And no one was paying any attention. No one was nodding. Until I said, just think about if you've got a cooling system and you suddenly have to make it 2 degrees cooler because all of a sudden it's 2 degrees warmer all across the year on average. How much is that going to cost you per square foot? And I could see one gentleman in the audience starting to do the sums in his head. That was 17 years ago. I wonder if he actually did anything. This is the way that governments are going to make you do something. Because pulling on heartstrings and giving very emotional speeches, my director at the Earth Observatory of Singapore likes to give very emotional speeches, doesn't work anymore. Appealing to people about their children's health in the future doesn't work anymore. It's going to cost you money. That works. And people are going to be watching. People have a much greater social conscience when it comes to climate change. They want to know whether a product is sustainable. And that's only going to increase as well. So you've got taxation and people power. Let's talk sectors. How long have I got, Matt? 5. Let's talk about sectors. The building sector. If you think about it, no matter where you cut it, the building sector has a huge contribution to carbon dioxide emissions. Their carbon footprint is big. Okay, there are things to do. The numbers are big, 27% building operations, 6%, 7%. What can you do? Well, there's plenty of things you can do, and you're going to talk about them today, I assume, right? How do you decarbonize? Well, low carbon materials and recycling. You're sitting in a low carbon building, a wooden building. Some call it the wooden box. It's a big box. It's wood. It's made of carbon. Sequesters carbon. It's a carbon neutral building. Implementing energy efficient manufacturing processes. I'm going to talk a little bit about steel and cement. And then the idea of carbon capture and storage technologies that are not these grand plans of sucking carbon out of the atmosphere in the middle of the ocean or something like that in individual buildings. These are new opportunities. Here's another one of our sustainable buildings. This is the Wave at NTU. As we move forward, there's going to be more increased emphasis on things like environmental product declarations and life cycle assessments, particularly across buildings and in the textile sector. And so that's why I've put this one in, because that's something that's going to be fundamental to both industries. This idea of understanding life cycle assessments and supply chains and how it rattles through the carbon footprint of all the materials used in building or retrofitting. The steel industry. I was fascinated to hear that China's made moves only in the last couple of days for no new steel plants. And a big effort to retrofit old steel plants with old technology to new technology to significantly reduce the carbon footprint. Green steel, I think, coming from a scientist, is going to be a pivotal innovation. It's making steel with lower carbon footprint. Reduce the carbon emissions of steel in construction industries. And it won't be long before big developers and big contractors, because I know several of them, even here in Singapore, are discussing this already, start demanding that a certain percentage of the steel used in a project has to be green steel. These discussions are ongoing, so it will happen. So here's an opportunity for construction industry to get in early and start making a big difference. The clicker has a little delay. It really likes steel. I don't know what I'm clicking at. All right, let's talk about the textiles. Now, believe it or not, before I got fat and bald, I used to be a professional surfer. And I worked for a surfing company called Billabong. And way back in the 90s, when I was surfing, they already had this program to try and make their shirts more sustainable. They wanted to make things out of recycled plastics. They wanted to make things out of recycled materials, recycled fabrics. Now, it was a screaming failure, but at least they tried. And then I went off into academia and I don't surf anymore. And that's why I got fat, not to do with the balding. But the textile sector has a lot to contribute. And there's some fundamental changes afoot in the textile sector that you can see. And it was interesting when I was given the brief to talk about this. You know, I'm quite happy talking about building construction because I've done that before, but I hadn't talked about the textile sector for a long time. So it's a bit of an experiment, okay? So if I'm out of bounds, please let me know after. Although you do have a chance of getting the flu if you come to talk to me. I pulled out a couple of plots, okay? So this is from the International Labour Organization. I think they have reasonable credibility, but I don't think it matters how you count this. A lot of the garment value chain is in the phases of fiber production, yarn production, fabric production, treatment, dyeing, and finishing. I've seen a lot of, well, not a lot, but I've seen some commentary saying that, you know, one of our biggest contributors is distribution and transport of products. In the textiles industry, from what I can gather, and these papers are a little bit old, but I don't think it's changed that much since then, we're talking about at least half of the carbon emissions coming before you put it on a truck to send it anywhere. And so this is where a lot of the effort can go. And then the idea of the end of life, you know, recycling things is a great idea, but what sort of contribution is it going to make to carbon emissions? Probably not that much. A lot of it has to be in the production. And my favorite shirt is a bamboo shirt. I like it because it's sustainable. I'm the director of a sustainable education center. I like to, you know, walk the talk. I don't have a car. Students are quite surprised when they see me on the bus outside MBS. And I like this idea that we can move towards more sustainable fabrics. And yeah, I know, I have to argue with NTU every time we order bamboo t-shirts. I see Andrew Krupa's in the room. He has the same argument. We put out say we're going to make a run of t-shirts. We're going to make a run of polo shirts. We order the bamboo one, and the finance people come back and say it's more expensive than the cotton one. And then we have to fight. But it's a worthy fight because we need to move towards these sustainable materials. It's a big difference. And I like this as well from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I looked, the other day I was going to Korea. And so when I leave Singapore, I finally stop wearing shorts and I put on my jeans. And I've had my jeans for 20 years. And I was really interested in this. I spent hours reading this, and my wife walked past when I was making this slide. She said, "What on earth are you looking at?" And I said, "Well, it's about making jeans better and more sustainable." And I thought it was really cool. So I thought I'd just take that one little example as an example that you could use as a discussion point this afternoon. You know, because it's not just jeans, it's all the things that we use. I try and use my clothes until they're dead. That's why I don't look very fashionable. But supply chain decarbonization is not something that's new to the industry. As I dug into this over the last couple of weeks, I was quite surprised to see the number of people that are involved in the Fashion Pact, the number of organizations that have already signed up, that are making fundamental steps in this way. And one of the things I always say to the students is, at the other end of campus, some of them who are interested not only in science and entrepreneurship, is take the opportunity to learn from other businesses. Don't copy other businesses, but learn from other businesses. Why have these people all signed up? Why have these businesses all signed up for the Fashion Pact? Is it because of social pressure? Is it because of pressure from their market? Is it pressure from their board and their investors? It's interesting to think about the underlying reasons why people get involved in these. And so I think this is one of the things I just wanted to pick up. It's a good collaboration between suppliers to move towards low carbon technologies. And so I think I just put that in there because I want people to think about options for learning from other people in the industry. I know it's a competitive industry. Building is also a competitive industry, but you still can learn from each other. And it's good to see workshops like this and roundtables and panel discussions for people to exchange ideas. So what's my summary here? Well, at NTU, we're trying to, you know, walk the talk, right? We're trying to actually deliver on sustainability. Sustainability in education, sustainability in technology, and sustainable buildings. And so this one just across the road here, our Hive building, another one of our sustainable buildings. Feel free to go and have a look at it. And, you know, by embracing this innovation and this push towards cleaner technologies and clean energy, there's a real opportunity for businesses across all different sectors. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that there are very clear sectorial differences between the building industry and the textiles industry. But there are some very clear commonalities as well. In terms of technology, in terms of policy, in terms of drive from the social side of things. And so understanding that's really important. It's one of the reasons that in the climate transformation program at EOS, we have a huge sustainability and humanities program, because the humanities plays a huge role in this anymore. It's not so much about science. It's mostly about technology, about policy, and about social science. And that's how we make change. So with that, I'm going to leave it there. If you're not doing anything on the 3rd of October, okay, CFIL, my center, with the help of our friends at Mapletree, are bringing Thomas Heatherwick to NTU. Now, who is Thomas Heatherwick? Hope some of you know. Thomas Heatherwick is the designer of the Hive and various other things. So if you're willing, please see if you can sign up. I think Matri is here somewhere. She told me this morning that there was 120 people registered already, so you might want to be quick. Okay, with that, thank you very much.